Hello and welcome to Late Night Elections. Today is October 11th, 2020, and we are just over 3 weeks away from the 2020 election. And so today I want to talk about how this is shaping up to be the most stable presidential race in recent American political history. Right now, you can see on 538, Biden is currently given an 86 out of 100 chance to win the election versus Donald Trump at just 14 in 100. And if we go down to see the history here, going back from all the way in June to now in mid October, you can see that these odds really haven't changed all that much. So if we go back to the beginning of June, we started with a 70% chance for Biden, 30% for Trump. It went up to Biden some, back down a little bit, but this is all still within, we had 70 to the peak here at 79. So it's really not changing that much. And we get that going throughout the months. Biden dips a little bit, but then it starts going back up a little bit. And it keeps going up and up as we get increasingly closer to the election. And here we are today at 86 to 14. Now, it is important to keep in mind with 538, it is not like polls, which polls are a snapshot in that moment of time, meaning if a poll is conducted from, say, August 1st to August 5th, that poll is reflecting what people are planning on doing at that time. It's not necessarily a prediction of what they're going to do come election day, whereas the 538 model is taking into account that uncertainty that still exists. So this is not an 86 to 14% chance if the election were held today. This is actually trying to predict the election results. So if the polls stay the same, we can actually plan on seeing Biden's odds increase more and more as we keep going closer to the election. I believe Nate Silver has even said that if election day were held right now, we would probably see something more like a 95 to 5 in favor of Biden and Trump respectively, because at that point there would be no uncertainty as far as there being additional time before the election. The only uncertainty that would still exist would be from there being a massive polling error. If we switch on over from looking to the chance of winning to the popular vote, we can see that this has also been incredibly stable. Going back again to the beginning of June, we have 52.5% for Joe Biden versus 46.2% for Donald Trump. And this has been incredibly stable. We see about a percent difference for Joe Biden, and for Donald Trump, he's also been incredibly stable, and there is a very wide gap between them. If we head on over to 2016, you might see the popular vote here and say, well, this also looks very stable, and we all know how this election ended up. So what is so different between 2016 and 2020? Well, one of the big differences is because the gap here is comparatively very narrow. You can see about at the end of the conventions that Clinton was barely ahead in the popular vote. It was very narrow. And even at some of these wider gaps, like right here in mid-August, we are at about a 9% difference, which is smaller than it is right now. And by the time the election was actually happening, we had a very narrow gap between the candidates. We had on over to the 2020 election, and this is a super wide gap the entire time. So that's the big difference here, and that's a big reason why this race has been incredibly stable. Now, you can't just look at 2016. If we want to go back even further, we can head on over to Real Clear Politics, since 538 did not have those kind of models previous to 2016. And we can see in the race between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama that there was a much higher degree of fluctuation. Now, keep in mind that on this y-axis here, that the numbers are going from 43% at the bottom to 49% at the top. So it's not quite as drastic as these massive fluctuations may have you think, but you can see that the gap here is also very narrow. And for a certain period of time, from a good portion of October, that Mitt Romney actually had the popular vote advantage in the polls over Barack Obama. We head on over to 2008 and we can see something similar. A lot of people tend to think of 2008 as almost a blowout for Obama and that he ran away with the election. Well, that's not really true looking at the data. There was multiple periods of time where McCain had the lead back here in December and January of the previous election year. In the beginning of that election year, again in March, he briefly took a lead. And again, all the way in September, just a couple months before the election happened, McCain had the popular vote lead on Barack Obama, and he really only in the last month started running away with things. So this was not a very stable race compared to 2020, where you're seeing very small changes. There's a lot of fluctuations happening in 2016, in 2012, in 2008 compared to 2020. And a big reason why this is happening has to do with Donald Trump's approval rating. We go to the day he was inaugurated, January 23rd, 2017. 45.5% approval to 41.3% disapproval. And this disapproval would pretty quickly skyrocket as people got a better idea of what this presidency was going to be like. It was up to above 50% by the middle of February, and just a few months later, it was up to 56% disapproval in June, and it would roughly hover around this for the remainder of the term. You know, you can see it started going back down a little bit once the COVID lockdowns started happening, a little bit of a rally around the flag effect going on, but then it quickly shot back up again. And the approval rating has also been incredibly stable. You know, you had a little bit of variation at the very beginning, which is pretty much to be expected of any presidency. But like you look beyond that first year and there's almost no fluctuation. Again, obviously there's going to be a little bit just because various policies and various actions and news that happens are going to affect things a little bit. Plus there's some degree of natural margin of error fluctuations that's just inherent to polling. But this approval rating has barely budged. And if you go back to the previous presidents in recent history and you look at their approval ratings, you can see this green line is Trump and the gray line is the president that it's focusing on. And you can see that Trump's is much more stable than every other president. You know, Barack Obama, compared to some of the others, he was pretty stable. But even he started out, you know, above 60%. And then by the end, he was a little bit below 50% for an over 10% difference. George W. Bush, obviously a massive change around, you know, September of 2001. And then that steadily went down, but we had almost 90% at the peak of here and then all the way down to below 50%. Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan. I mean, we can go on and on with these, even going back to presidents like Harry S. Truman from 1945 to 1953. It's obviously a lot less polling data back then, so we don't see the very minor changes like we do right now, but you can see massive changes in approval. And so that's a big difference, and that's what's really causing a lot of this stability in the race in 2020. People have very set opinions of this president. They either approve of him wholeheartedly or disapprove of him wholeheartedly for the most part. Joe Biden is a fairly similar case. He's a little more fluctuating than Trump, but you can see, you know, you're not having massive changes in approval with him. You know, some people kind of change their mind, but for the most part, you have a pretty set opinion of Joe Biden. And also keep in mind with Joe Biden, we can see from this Pew Research Center poll, I've talked about this before in a previous video, that People generally, they're voting for Biden because they're against Trump, not necessarily because they're for Biden. So about 2/3 of Biden's supporters are really more so against Trump than for Biden. And that doesn't mean that all those people voting against Trump are necessarily disapproving of Biden, but it just means that their primary motivation for voting is because they're against Donald Trump. And so when you get this, what Biden does doesn't really matter all that much. It's more so based around Donald Trump. And again, with his approval rating and his disapproval rating being so steady, there's really not that much that's going to shake up this election at this point. You know, the second debate for next week is canceled. We'll see what happens with the third debate. But at this point, I mean, like I said, there's just over 3 weeks left. There's not that much that can really happen at this point. And you have to be wondering, if you're Donald Trump, if you're the Trump campaign, what are you going to do to try to make a last minute Hail Mary for this election? Or do you think there's just going to be a massive polling error? Because at this point, again, going back to the chance of winning here, pretty much by the time we get to actual election day, his only chance, unless a major shakeup happens, which seems increasingly unlikely, is that there would have to be a massive polling difference or polling error. So let me know what you think. Do you think there's anything that could cause a major shakeup at this point? Why do you think this race has been so stable, or do you disagree that this race has been so stable? Let me know in the comments below. And be sure, if you enjoy this video, to give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more election analysis and discussion in the future.